Matthew is 40 years old. He has a decent job, he has a retirement account. He's not reckless with money, and when he finally runs the numbers, he sees the problem. The problem is not that he forgot to buy the perfect investment. The problem is that his plan is moving slower than his life. His contributions are fixed, his bills are not, and the finish line keeps getting quietly repriced. So this video is not about stock picking, market timing, crypto, or some magic shortcut. It's about one question. What has to be true for work to become optional in 10 years? And the answer comes down to a simple loop. The gap buys the calendar. The gap between what comes in, what goes out, and what your assets can eventually replace. Hi, I'm Matthew. I make finance simple. Whether you're looking to grow your wealth, understand investing, or just make smarter financial decisions, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe so you don't miss future videos. And if you enjoy this one, give it a comment and thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Here's the important boundary. This is financial education, not personal investment advice. Your taxes, health insurance, debt, family situation, job stability, and risk tolerance all matter. But the framework is still useful because it shows why some people can make work optional much faster than others. Most people think early retirement is mainly a return problem. If they could just earn a higher percentage, the whole thing would work. But for a 10-year window, return is only one part of the machine. The bigger question is whether the gap is large enough to do serious work before time runs out. That's why inflation matters even before we talk about investments. The Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI inflation calculator is built around CPI-U, a measure of price changes for goods and services bought by urban households. You don't need a perfect inflation forecast to understand the pressure. If the cost of life keeps moving and the contribution doesn't, the plan gets weaker without looking broken. That's the quiet danger. The account still grows, the monthly transfer still happens, the person still feels disciplined, but the gap is not standing still. It's either being protected or it's being slowly eaten. Start with Matthew. He has $150,000 saved and adds $1,500 a month. If we use a simple 6% annual example return, compounded monthly, he ends up with about $519,000 after 10 years. That's real progress. But it's not work optional if his life costs $5,000 a month. And if he raises that contribution by 5% each year, the same starting point gets closer to $575,000. Same starting balance, same assumed return, different contribution path. That difference matters because 10 years is only 120 monthly deposits. You don't get 30 years for small improvements to quietly fix the plan. In a compressed window, the first year, second year, and third year carry real weight. So the question is not just, am I investing? It's, is the amount I invest becoming stronger fast enough to change the date? That's the first turn. A fixed contribution can be responsible and still be too slow. It can preserve the feeling of progress while the calendar keeps winning. This is where the gap buys the calendar, not because it guarantees a result, because every extra dollar invested early has more months to work, and every permanent bill does the opposite. It raises the target and steals from the engine at the same time. So before Matthew asks, what investment do I need? He has to ask, what monthly life am I trying to replace? If his life costs $5,000 a month, that's $60,000 a year. The simple 25x rule turns that into a $1.5 million target. Not because $1.5 million is magic, because $60,000 is 4% of $1.5 million. But here's the catch. The 4% rule was built as a historical planning lens, not a promise. Recent withdrawal research still debates the right starting point. Morningstar's 2026 guidance, for example, points to 3.9% for a 30-year retirement under its assumptions. And if someone is trying to retire early, the money may need to last longer than 30 years. So Matthew should not hear 25x and think, done. He should hear, starting point. At 3.5%, that $60,000 life needs about $1.7 million. At 3%, it needs about $2 million. That changes the emotional shape of the goal. The scary number is not random, it's the price of the monthly life Matthew wants the portfolio to carry. And that means expenses matter twice. A $500 permanent monthly expense is not just $500 leaving this month. It's $6,000 a year of future lifestyle that may need roughly $150,000 in extra assets at a 4% planning rate. That's why lifestyle creep is so dangerous in a short window. It doesn't just reduce what Matthew can invest, it raises the amount he has to invest for. This is not about never enjoying money, it's about knowing which purchases become permanent claims on the future. A vacation is a cost. A bigger monthly house payment, car payment, or lifestyle baseline is a new target. This is why the target can change faster than people expect. A $300 monthly commitment can imply about $90,000 of extra future assets at a 4% planning rate. A $1,000 monthly lifestyle upgrade can imply about $300,000. Again, that doesn't make every upgrade wrong, it just means the choice has a second price tag. The first price tag is what it costs today. The second price tag is how much more freedom money you may need later. Now we get to the lever that usually matters most. Not because returns don't matter, but because returns can't compound money that never gets invested. If Matthew makes $85,000 and gets to $120,000 over a few years, the headline is not the $35,000 raise. The headline is what survives the raise. If every dollar becomes a nicer apartment, a larger car payment, and more invisible monthly commitments, his retirement date barely moves. But if the raise lets him invest an extra $2,000 a month, that's $24,000 a year of new fuel. That one change can matter more than trying to squeeze another 0.5% out of the portfolio. This is the part that gets flattened into earn more, spend less. But that phrase is too vague to be useful. The real rule is sharper. Grow income, then defend the gap before the lifestyle absorbs it. Every raise has two doors. Behind one door, the raise becomes a nicer version of the same trap. More comfort, more bills, more target to replace later. Behind the other door, some of the raise becomes distance from the paycheck. The trick is not to live frozen forever. The trick is to decide in advance how much of the raise is allowed to become lifestyle and how much has to become the gap. If that decision is not made on purpose, the monthly bills usually make it for you. Watch what happens when the gap changes. With $150,000 already saved, $1,500 a month for 10 years at a 6% example return lands around $519,000. Raise that monthly investment to $3,500 and the result is about $846,000. Add a 3% yearly contribution increase and it gets near $921,000. None of that required a heroic return assumption. It required a bigger gap and a contribution path that didn't stay frozen. That's the second turn. The market doesn't rescue a tiny gap, it amplifies the gap you give it. This also explains why two people with the same discipline can end up in totally different places. Discipline applied to a small gap creates slow progress. Discipline applied to a widening gap starts compressing the calendar. Now be careful here, because this is where bad early retirement content gets dishonest. If Matthew needs somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million, then $921,000 is not full retirement. But it's also not failure. It's a major reduction in paycheck dependence. And that matters because work optional is not always a light switch. Sometimes it's a dimmer. Using a rough 4% planning lens, a $921,000 portfolio points to about $36,800 a year before taxes, fees, and all the real-world cautions. Against a $60,000 lifestyle, that's roughly 61% of the life covered on paper. That doesn't mean Matthew should quit tomorrow. It means the paycheck has lost some of its power over him. He may have room to negotiate, switch to lower stress work, consult part-time, or take a risk he couldn't take before. You can picture this in stages. At 25% covered, the portfolio may not replace work, but it can absorb shocks. At 50%, the job still matters, but the fear changes. At 75%, the person may be able to choose work on different terms. At 100%, the math may support full independence, if the risks are handled. Those thresholds are not official milestones. They're a way to stop seeing retirement as all or nothing. They turn the question from, am I done, into, how much of my life still needs the paycheck? This is one of the most useful reframes in the whole video. Early retirement doesn't start when the balance hits a magical finish line. It starts when the paycheck stops being the only thing holding your life together. But there's another problem. A spreadsheet can make almost any plan look stable if every year arrives in the right order. Real life doesn't arrive in the right order. This is sequence risk in plain English. If the bad market years arrive right after someone stops working, withdrawals can do more damage because they're selling from a portfolio that's already down. Same average return, different order, different emotional experience, different chance of staying calm. Imagine a $1 million portfolio falls 20%. On screen, that's already painful. Now imagine the person also has to pull $40,000 from it for spending. The next recovery has to work from a smaller base. That simplified example is not a full retirement model, it's a behavior warning. The danger is not just the market falling. The danger is needing the portfolio to fund life at the exact moment the portfolio is wounded. That's why the plan needs jobs, not just assets. One job is growth, because the money still needs long-term engine power. One job is stability, because bad years happen. One job is flexibility, because a person who's forced to sell at the worst time may turn a temporary downturn into a permanent problem. This is not a recommendation to buy a specific fund, bond, property, dividend stock, or anything else. It's a planning question. If the first 2 years after Matthew leaves full-time work are ugly, what part of the plan stops him from panicking? A simple stress test is more useful than pretending markets are smooth. Could he cover 12 to 24 months of essential expenses without selling growth assets in a panic? Could he reduce spending in a bad year? Could he earn part-time income if needed? Could he delay the final leap by 1 year without the whole plan breaking? Those questions are not exciting. That's why they matter. Early retirement is not only about getting free, it's about staying free when the first bad year shows up. Because the best plan on paper is useless if it turns Matthew into a forced seller the first time the market falls. The goal is not the highest possible return, the goal is a plan he can actually hold. And this brings us back to the main question. What has to be true for someone to stop needing full-time work in 10 years? The answer is a 5-line dashboard. Line 1. Monthly life. What does the life cost before the paycheck stops? For Matthew, we used $5,000 a month. Line 2. Target range. At $60,000 a year, 25x points to 1.5 million, while more cautious withdrawal rates can push the target closer to 1.7 million or $2 million. Line 3. Investable gap. How much money can move into assets each month, and does that number rise each year? Line 4. Resilience. What protects the plan when the market, job, health, or family situation doesn't cooperate? Line 5. Paycheck dependence. What percentage of the monthly life still needs work income? This dashboard is the antidote to fantasy. It can tell Matthew, yes, full retirement in 10 years may be possible if the gap gets much larger. It can also tell him, no, full retirement in 10 years is not realistic from this starting point, but partial freedom might be. And that honesty is the whole point. A 10-year plan should not flatter you. It should show you which lever is too small. If the target is too high, lower the required monthly life. If the gap is too small, grow income or cut permanent claims. If the plan is too fragile, build more resilience before pretending the number is enough. That's not as flashy as a secret investment, but it's far more useful. The gap buys the calendar. Not all at once, not magically, and not for everyone in exactly 10 years. But every time Matthew widens the gap and keeps it from turning into lifestyle, the calendar changes. Every time he raises contributions instead of freezing them, the calendar changes. Every time he lowers the monthly life the portfolio must replace, the calendar changes. Every time he builds a buffer that keeps him from selling in panic, the calendar changes. So the practical audit is simple. What does my life cost each month? What target range does that create? How much am I investing now? Is that number rising every year? What would protect me in a bad market? And what percentage of my life still depends on the next paycheck? If you can answer those 6 questions, early retirement stops being a motivational slogan. It becomes a measurement system. Start there. Use the gap as the signal. That's the framework. Monthly life, target range, rising gap, resilience buffer, and paycheck dependence. If one line is weak, the next move gets clearer. If the gap is tiny, the answer is probably not a hotter investment, it's making the gap bigger. If the target is too large, the question is which cost became permanent. If the buffer is missing, the plan is not ready for a bad year. The point is not to predict the future perfectly, the point is to see which part of the machine needs work. If this helped, like the video, comment with the one part of the retirement math you want broken down next, and subscribe for more plain English money breakdowns. Thanks.